My name is Dorothy. I'm 85 years old, and I'm about to tell you the secret that has lived in my chest for 79 years. Some secrets are buried with the dead. This one was supposed to be. But at my age, with my time running short, I've learned that silence protects the wrong people. I've learned that the only way to truly bury a secret is to dig it up first, hold it to the light, and let the truth kill whatever power it had over you. So here it is. My father told me it was tradition. I was 6 years old and I believed him. It started the summer I turned 6, the summer my mother went to help my grandmother recover from her stroke. 3 months, she said. Just 3 months. And then everything would go back to normal. But nothing was ever normal again. Papa was different when Mama wasn't there. Quieter during the day, but different quiet. Not the comfortable silence of a man reading his newspaper after work, but the careful quiet of someone planning something. He started coming to my room after I'd gone to sleep. The first time, he said he needed to check if I was warm enough. The second time, he said little girls needed special protection at night. By the third time, he'd invented the tradition. "This is something special that happens between fathers and daughters in our family," he whispered in the dark of my pink bedroom with its cheerful flower wallpaper and the teddy bear I'd named Mr. Buttons. "It's been passed down for generations. It's our secret tradition." Tradition. The word sounded important, sacred even, like going to church on Sundays or having turkey at Thanksgiving. Something families did because it meant something special. I was 6. I believed in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy and the absolute authority of adults. When said it was tradition, I believed that too. For 3 months, while my mother sat beside my grandmother's hospital bed, my father created his own twisted ritual in the house that was supposed to be my sanctuary. And I let him, because he'd convinced me it was normal. He'd convinced me it was love. "This is how fathers show their daughters they're special," he'd say. "But it's only for us to know." Mama wouldn't understand. She didn't grow up with our traditions. Our traditions. As if we were some kind of special family with secret knowledge passed down through generations. As if what he was doing was cultural heritage instead of what it really was, a crime against a child who trusted him completely. I never told my mother when she came home. How could I? Papa had spent 3 months training me to believe that what happened in the dark was normal, necessary, even special. He'd built an entire mythology around his abuse, wrapped it in the language of family and tradition and love. And I carried that mythology with me for decades. I carried it through childhood, through adolescence, through my wedding day when I walked down the aisle and promised to love and honor a man who reminded me just enough of Papa to feel familiar. I carried it through raising my own children, hyper-vigilant and protective in ways I couldn't fully explain. I carried it through Papa's funeral 20 years ago, when people spoke about what a devoted father he'd been, what a pillar of the community. I stood beside his casket and felt nothing but relief that his secrets were finally buried with him. Except they weren't buried. Not really. Because I was still alive, still carrying the weight of what he'd taught me to call tradition. Still carrying the shame of a 6-year-old girl who'd been convinced she was participating in something sacred instead of surviving something horrible. It took me 85 years to understand that shame belongs to the person who causes it, not the person who carries it. It took me 85 years to realize that calling it tradition didn't make it true. And it took, me 85 years to find the courage to say the words I should have been able to say when I was 6. What happened to me was not tradition. It was not love. It was not normal or special or sacred. It was abuse. And it was wrong. My father took many things to his grave. His reputation, his standing in the community, the false story he'd built around himself as a good man and loving father. But he's not taking this secret with him, because I'm still here, and I'm finally ready to tell the truth. Not for revenge. What would be the point at my age? Not for justice. That ship sailed. Decades ago when I chose protection over prosecution, silence over scandal. I'm telling this truth for every little girl who's ever been convinced that the worst thing happening to her is actually the most special. For every woman who's carried shame that was never hers to carry. For every daughter who was taught that love looks like secrecy and that tradition can justify anything. I'm telling this truth because at 85, I finally understand that speaking up isn't about destroying the dead. It's about freeing the living. My name is Dorothy. I survived, and I'm done protecting the memory of a man who never protected me. The tradition ends here. The summer I turned 6 was supposed to be magical. Mama had been planning it for months. She'd teach me to make her famous sugar cookies. We'd plant a garden together, maybe even get that kitten I'd been begging for since Christmas. Instead, it became the summer I learned that the people you trust most can be the ones who hurt you worst. Grandma Rose had her stroke on a Tuesday in June. I remember because it was the day before my kindergarten graduation, and suddenly all the excitement about my little white dress and paper. Diploma disappeared in a flurry of phone calls and suitcase packing. I have to go help Grandma get better, Mama explained, kneeling down to my height the way she always did when she had something important to tell me. She needs someone to take care of her, and I'm her daughter. That's what daughters do. They help their mothers when they're sick. I nodded solemnly, already understanding the weight of being a daughter, already learning the lessons about sacrifice and duty that would shape the rest of my life. But what about me? I asked, because at 6, you still believe you're the center of everyone's universe. Papa will take care of you, she said, smoothing my hair with that gentle touch I wouldn't feel again for 3 months. He loves you so much, sweetheart. He's excited to have special time with just his little girl. Special time. Those words would take on a different meaning entirely by the end of the summer. The first week after Mama left was actually wonderful. Papa took me out for ice cream every night after dinner. He let me stay up past my bedtime to watch the late movie with him on our old black and white television. He even took a day off work to take me to the zoo, just the two of us. I felt like the luckiest little girl in the world. I had Papa all to myself, and he seemed different without Mama around. More relaxed, more fun, more willing to break the little rules that made childhood feel constrained. This is our special time together, he'd say, ruffling my hair as we shared a bag of popcorn at the Saturday matinee. Just Papa and his best girl. Best girl. I loved being Papa's best girl. It made me feel important, chosen, special in a way that only children who've been singled out for attention can understand. The change came gradual, at first. It started with bedtime routines that began to feel different. Papa had always tucked me in and read me a story. That was normal. That was what loving fathers did. But now the stories took longer. The tucking in became more thorough. The goodnight kisses lingered. You're getting to be such a big girl, he'd say, sitting on the edge of my bed in the soft pink glow of my nightlight. Soon you'll be old enough to learn about special things that only big girls get to know. I preened at being called a big girl. At 6, there's nothing you want more than to be older, more mature, closer to the mysterious world of grown-ups with their secrets and their special knowledge. I had no idea I was being groomed. The first time it happened, I thought it was an accident. Papa had come to check on me after I'd called out about a bad dream, and when he sat on my bed to comfort me, his hand moved somewhere it had never moved before. Oops, he said softly, but he didn't move his hand away. You know, Dorothy, you're getting to be such a special little girl. There are special ways that papas can help their daughters feel safe and loved. I lay very still, confused but trusting. This was Papa, who'd taught me to ride a bicycle and helped me catch fireflies in mason jars. Papa, who'd read me stories every night since I could remember, and who'd carried me on his shoulders through every parade and fair in our small town. If Papa said something was special, then it must be special. This is something that happens between fathers and daughters who love each other very much, he whispered, and his voice had taken on that careful, gentle tone adults use when they're about to tell you something important. But it's just for us to know. It's our special secret. Secret. The word thrilled me almost as much as it confused me. Secrets were exciting, mysterious, important. Having a secret with Papa made me feel grown up and trusted and special. I didn't understand then that secrets between adults and children are almost never about protecting the child. This is how it's always been done in our family, Papa continued, his voice hypnotic in the darkness of my room. My Papa showed me this love when I was little, and his Papa showed him. It's a tradition, passed down from fathers to daughters for generations. Tradition. That word carried weight in our house. We had traditions for everything. Christmas morning rituals that had to be followed exactly, Sunday dinner preparations that involved specific plates and prayers, bedtime routines that had been sacred since I was born. If this was tradition, then it was important. If this was tradition, then it was right. And if this was tradition, then it was normal. That's how he convinced me to participate in my own abuse. By convincing me it was cultural heritage instead of criminal behavior. By making me feel special instead of violated. By turning what should have been my first lesson in body autonomy into a lesson in family loyalty instead. Night after night, the tradition continued. Night after night, Papa would come to my room and remind me how special I was, how much he loved me, how this was just what loving families did together. And night after night, I believed him. Because when you're 6 years old, your father is God, and truth and safety all rolled into one. When your father tells you something is normal, you don't question it. When your father tells you something is love, you accept it as love. Even when your body tells you something different. Even when your instincts whisper that something is wrong. Even when the special feeling he promised never comes. And instead you just feel confused and uncomfortable and somehow smaller than you were before. I learned to lie very still and think about other things. I learned to count the flowers on my wallpaper until it was over. I learned to smile when he told me I was his best girl, even when I didn't feel like anyone's best anything anymore. Most importantly, I learned to keep the secret. Because Papa had made it very clear that Mama wouldn't understand our tradition. That other people might not see how special and normal it was. That it was up to me to protect our family's sacred ritual from people who might not appreciate its beauty. At 6 years old, I thought I was protecting tradition. I had no idea I was protecting a predator. Mama came home on a Thursday in September, carrying a suitcase full of grief and exhaustion. Grandma Rose had recovered enough to live independently, but the stroke had changed her, made her smaller and more fragile, and Mama carried that weight in her shoulders and her smile. "Oh, my sweet girl," she said, dropping to her knees in our front hallway to wrap me in the kind of hug I'd been missing for 3 months. "Look how much you've grown. Papa told me you were such a good girl while I was gone." I hugged her back with desperate intensity, breathing in her familiar smell of lavender soap and White Shoulders perfume. For a moment, everything felt normal again. For a moment, I was just a 6-year-old girl who'd missed her mother terribly. But then Papa appeared in the doorway, and I felt that familiar twist in my stomach that had become my body's response to his presence. "She was perfect," he said, his voice carrying that warm pride that other people heard as parental love. "We had some wonderful father-daughter time together, didn't we, sweetheart?" I nodded because that's what I was supposed to do. Because good girls agreed with their fathers. Because our tradition had taught me that my role was to smile and confirm whatever story Papa needed people to believe. "Well, I'm sure you're happy to have your room back to yourself," Mama said, ruffling my hair. "No more Papa checking on you every night." I felt my face go hot. She had no idea how true that was, or how much I hoped it would be. "Actually," Papa said, and something in his tone made me look up sharply. "I think Dorothy and I should continue some of our special time together. She's gotten so mature while you were gone, haven't you, sweetheart? She's ready for more grown-up experiences." The way he said grown-up experiences made my stomach hurt. I looked between my parents, willing Mama to somehow understand what he really meant, to see the fear I couldn't voice, to save me from the tradition I'd been taught to protect. But Mama just smiled and nodded. "That's wonderful. She is getting to be such a big girl. Just make sure you don't spoil her too much with all your special attention." If only she'd known what Papa's special attention actually involved. That first night with Mama home, I lay in my bed listening to my parents talk in the kitchen below. Normal conversation about normal things. How Grandma Rose was adjusting, what had happened at Papa's work. While Mama was gone, plans for my upcoming first grade year. I waited for Papa's footsteps on the stairs. I waited for the gentle knock on my door that would signal the continuation of our tradition. I waited with the sick anticipation of someone who knows something terrible is coming but has been taught not to resist it. But Papa didn't come that night, or the next night, or the night after that. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt confused and somehow guilty, like I'd done something wrong to make Papa lose interest in our special time together. That's what abuse does to a child's mind. It makes you grateful for the violation and worried when it stops. It convinces you that the trauma was actually attention, that the predator was actually expressing love, that your worth as a person is somehow connected to your willingness to participate in your own destruction. For 2 weeks, I lived in a strange limbo. During the day, our family felt normal again. Mama bustling around the kitchen, Papa reading his newspaper in his favorite chair, me playing with my dolls and crayons and all the ordinary toys of childhood. But at night, I lay awake waiting for Papa to remember our tradition, waiting for him to decide that I was still special enough to deserve his secret attention, waiting and hating myself for waiting. The 3rd week after Mama's return, Papa started a new routine. Instead of coming to my room, he started asking me to help him with things after. Mama went to bed early with her headaches that had started during her time caring for Grandma Rose and that would plague her for the rest of her life. "Dorothy, can you help Papa look for something in the basement?" he'd ask, his voice casual and normal. "I need someone with small hands to reach into tight spaces." I'd follow him downstairs, my feet heavy with the knowledge that this was where our tradition would continue. The basement was dark and private, filled with storage boxes and old furniture and shadows that could hide anything. "This is even better," Papa would whisper as he'd recreate the ritual he'd established in my bedroom. "This is even more special, just for us." The basement became our new secret place. Cold concrete floors and musty air and the constant fear that Mama might come downstairs looking for us, might discover our tradition and somehow ruin. Everything Papa had taught me was sacred. Because by then, I was fully indoctrinated. By then, I believed completely that what we were doing was normal and special, and something that loving families did together. I believed that keeping the secret was my job, my responsibility, my way of protecting. Something precious. I had no words for what was actually happening to me. At 6, almost 7, I didn't have the vocabulary for sexual abuse or grooming or manipulation. I only had Papa's words: special, tradition, love, secret. And I only had Papa's version of reality. That this was how fathers showed daughters they were cherished. That this was knowledge passed down through generations. That this was something beautiful that only we were mature enough to understand. School started that fall, and I became a different kind of child. Quieter, more careful, more aware of the difference between the face I showed the world and the secret I carried inside. My first grade teacher, Mrs. Henderson, was kind and patient, but I could never quite meet her eyes when she asked if everything was okay at home. Because everything was okay at home. Papa said so. Papa said we were the most loving family in the world, and our tradition proved it. The other children seemed so young to me, so innocent in their complaints about bedtimes and vegetables and having to share toys. They had no idea what real grown-up experiences were like. They had no idea how special it was to be trusted with family. Secrets. I felt older than my years, and somehow responsible for protecting not just my own secret, but Papa's reputation, Mama's peace of mind, our family's standing in the community. At 7 years old, I thought I was being mature and responsible. I had no idea I was being victimized and silenced. The tradition continued for 2 more years. 2 more years of basement visits and whispered reminders about family loyalty and special love. 2 more years of learning to disconnect from my body, to float somewhere else while Papa expressed his love in ways that made my stomach hurt and my heart feel heavy. 2 more years of believing that survival was the same thing as consent, that submission was the same thing as love, that secrecy was the same thing as intimacy. It only stopped when Papa got scared. I was almost 9 when Mama found me sitting on the bathroom floor, crying and touching. Myself, the way Papa had taught me, was part of our tradition. "Dorothy," she gasped, her face a mixture of shock and confusion. "What are you doing?" I looked up at her with all the innocence of a child who'd been taught that what she was doing was normal. "Papa showed me this special touching. He said all girls learn it from their papas." The silence that followed was the longest of my young life. Mama knelt down beside me, her face white as paper. "Sweetheart, what exactly has Papa been teaching you?" And for one moment, just one moment, I almost told her everything. I almost explained about our tradition, about the special love, about how Papa had taught me that this was how families showed they cared for each other. But then I heard Papa's footsteps in the hallway, heard him call out, Everything okay in there? And I remembered what Papa had told me about protecting our family's special secret. Nothing, Mama, I said quickly. I was just playing a game. I watched something die in Mama's eyes that day. Some trust, some innocence, some belief in the safety of her own home. But she didn't ask me anything else. She didn't push for details or demand explanations. She just helped me get dressed and never mentioned it again. Later that night, I heard my parents talking in their bedroom, urgent, hushed voices that carried through the thin walls of our house. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the tone: concern, fear, something that sounded like anger. The tradition stopped completely after that night. Papa never came to my room again. He never asked me to help him in the basement. He never spoke to me about special family secrets or the love that fathers and daughters shared. Instead, he became distant and careful, treating me with the polite formality usually reserved for strangers. I thought I'd done something wrong. I thought I'd somehow ruined our special relationship, failed to protect our tradition properly. I spent my 9th year of life mourning the loss of what I'd been taught to see as love, grieving for a connection I didn't understand was actually abuse. It would take me decades to realize that what I'd lost wasn't love at all. It was innocence. And the man I'd called Papa had been the one to steal it. After the tradition stopped, our house became a museum of unspoken things. Mama and Papa moved around each other with the careful politeness of strangers sharing a space, and I moved around both of them like a ghost, haunting my own childhood. Nobody ever mentioned what had happened. Nobody ever explained why Papa suddenly treated me like I was made of something dangerous, why he stopped reading me bedtime stories, why he barely looked at me during dinner. I just knew that somehow I had broken something precious. Mama threw herself into making everything appear normal. She volunteered for every school committee, hosted elaborate birthday parties, made sure I had the prettiest dresses and the newest toys. On Haopi, the surface, we looked like the perfect family: successful father, devoted mother, well-behaved daughter. But perfect families don't have fathers who can't be alone with their daughters. Perfect families don't have mothers who hover constantly, who never leave their children unattended with anyone, who develop a hypervigilance that makes normal family interactions feel like military operations. Perfect families don't have 9-year-old girls who flinch when men hug them, who can't sleep without checking their door locks 3 times, who've learned to read the emotional temperature of a room before they enter it. I became an expert at reading people's faces, their body language, their tone of voice. I developed survival skills that would serve me well later in life, but that no child should ever need to learn. Most importantly, I learned that some things were too big, too dangerous, too explosive to ever speak out loud. School became my sanctuary. Mrs. Patterson, my 3rd grade teacher, was gentle and encouraging, and for 6 hours a day, I could pretend to be a normal child with normal problems. I threw myself into reading and arithmetic and art projects, desperate to excel at something that had nothing to do with family traditions or special secrets. But even at school, I felt different from the other children. They seemed so carefree, so innocent in their assumptions about safety and love and trust. They complained about their parents' rules and restrictions, not understanding how lucky they were to have parents who cared enough to set boundaries. They had no idea that some parents created boundaries just to cross them. I made friends, but carefully, cautiously. I never invited anyone to my house, and I rarely accepted invitations to theirs. Sleepovers were our overs. Absolutely forbidden. Though I could never explain to anyone why the idea of sleeping in someone else's home filled me with panic. Dorothy's just shy, Mama would explain when other mothers asked why I never wanted to participate in overnight parties or summer camps. She's a homebody, like me. Shy. Homebody. Nice words for a child who'd learned that home wasn't always safe, that the people who were supposed to protect you could be the ones who hurt you, that love and danger could wear the same face. As I got older, the silence in our house took on different qualities. Sometimes it was comfortable, the quiet of a family that had learned to coexist peacefully. Sometimes it was tense, the quiet of people afraid to say the wrong thing. But mostly, it was the silence of secrets carefully preserved. Papa and I developed a relationship based entirely on avoidance. We were polite to each other, formal even. He never asked about my day, my friends, my dreams. I never sought him out for help or comfort or advice. We shared a roof and a last name and absolutely nothing else. Mama tried to fill the gap, becoming both mother and father in her attempts to give me a normal childhood. She taught me to drive, helped me with homework, attended every school play and sports event with the dedication of someone trying to be enough for two parents. But she never asked me about the years when she was gone. Never wondered what had happened during those 3 months when I was alone with Papa. Never questioned why her husband and daughter could barely be in the same room together. I think she knew, on some level. I think some part of her understood what the silence was protecting. But knowing and being willing to confront knowledge are two very different things. It was easier to pretend that everything was fine. Easier to focus on my academic achievements and my good behavior, and my reputation as a sweet, well-mannered child. Easier to believe that whatever had happened was in the past, was over, was something we could all move on from if we just never spoke of it. But silence doesn't heal trauma. It just preserves it. Like a fossil trapped in amber, perfect and untouchable and forever frozen in time. By the time I reached high school, I had learned to be two people. There was the Dorothy that everyone saw, honor roll student, church youth group member, babysitter trusted by every family in town. That Dorothy was responsible and mature and reliable, the kind of girl parents pointed to as an example for their own daughters. And then there was the Dorothy I carried inside, the one who knew that trust was dangerous, that love came with conditions, that the adults who were supposed to protect children were often the ones children needed protection from, that Dorothy was angry and hurt and confused about why she'd been chosen for Papa's special attention, that Dorothy wondered if there was something wrong with her, something that had marked her as different, as available, as someone who deserved what had happened to her, that Dorothy carried shame that didn't belong to her and guilt that had been planted by someone else, and silence that felt like a weight pressing down on her chest every day. I started dating when I was 16, mostly, because it was expected of teenage girls. But I chose boys who were safe, quiet, respectful, easily controlled. Boys who wouldn't push for physical intimacy, who wouldn't make demands I wasn't ready to meet. I had no framework for healthy relationships, no understanding of what normal physical affection looked like between people who cared about each other. My only model for intimacy was what Papa had called love, and I knew instinctively that whatever that had been, it wasn't something I wanted to recreate. So I dated boys I didn't really like, held hands I didn't want to hold, and accepted goodnight kisses that felt like obligations rather than expressions of affection. And I told myself this was normal. This was what teenage romance was supposed to feel like. Careful and controlled and slightly uncomfortable. Just like I'd told myself that Papa's tradition had been normal, had been love, had been something special just for us. I was 18 when I met Robert. Robert was different from the other boys I'd known. He was older, more confident, more willing to take charge in ways that felt familiar, even as they made me nervous. He had opinions about everything, what I should wear, where we should go, how I should act when we were together. Other girls might have found his controlling nature alarming. I found it comforting. After years of living with the chaos of unspoken trauma, the unpredictability of never knowing when silence might break or secrets might spill, Robert's need to control everything felt like safety. He made all the decisions, so I didn't have to. He told me what he expected, so I didn't have to guess. He created rules and boundaries and structure, and I followed them with the gratitude of someone who had learned that submission was easier than resistance. "You're so mature for your age," he told me after we'd been dating for 6 months. "Most girls your age are still children. But you understand what real relationships require. Real relationships." I had no idea what those looked like, but I knew I wanted one. I wanted something genuine and honest and true, something that had nothing to do with secrets or traditions or special love that had to be hidden. When Robert proposed 2 weeks after my 19th birthday, I said yes with the desperation of someone drowning who's just been thrown a life preserver. I thought marriage would save me from my past. I thought becoming Robert's wife would make me normal, would give me a clean slate, would let me start over as someone who had never been Papa's best girl. I had no idea I was just trading one form of control for another. But that realization would come later. For now, at 19, I was just grateful to have found someone who wanted me despite what I'd been taught to believe was my damage. Someone who loved me enough to marry me, even though I carried secrets I could never share. Someone who promised to protect me, even though I'd never told him what I needed protection from. I walked down the aisle in a white dress that felt like a costume, making promises I didn't fully understand to a man I barely knew, surrounded by people who thought they were celebrating love. And for the first time since I was 6 years old, I felt hope. Maybe this would be different. Maybe this would be better. Maybe this would finally be the love I'd been promised but never received. Maybe marriage would teach me what real love looked like. I had no idea that real love doesn't require you to disappear, but I was about to learn. Marriage to Robert taught me that there are many ways to lose yourself, and most of them are perfectly legal. Our honeymoon was a disaster I was too naive to recognize as a warning. Robert had expectations about how I should behave, how I should respond, what I should want, and when I should want it. When I couldn't meet those expectations, when my body froze or my mind went somewhere else, he became frustrated in ways that felt dangerous and familiar. "What's wrong with you?" he asked on our third night in Niagara Falls, his voice carrying the same mix of disappointment and anger I'd learned to fear in Papa's voice. "Don't you want to be a real wife?" A real wife. I had no idea what that meant, but I knew I wanted to be one. I wanted to be normal, wanted to leave my childhood behind, wanted to prove that whatever had happened with Papa hadn't broken me permanently. So I learned to pretend. I learned to make the right sounds at the right times, to move my body in ways that convinced Robert I was enjoying myself, to perform intimacy even when every touch felt like an invasion. I got very good at disappearing while staying physically present. I'd learned that skill during the years of Papa's tradition, and it served me well in marriage. Robert never asked why I went somewhere else during intimate moments. He never wondered why I flinched at unexpected touches, or why I needed the lights off and the room completely quiet. He never questioned why I took so long in the bathroom afterward, scrubbing my skin until it was raw. He was getting what he wanted. That was enough. The first few years of marriage passed in a blur of trying to be perfect. I kept a spotless house, cooked elaborate meals, entertained Robert's colleagues with the kind of gracious hospitality I'd learned watching Mama perform. Femininity, like a full-time job. I threw myself into being the ideal wife with the same desperation I'd once brought to protecting Papa's secrets. If I could just be good enough, if I could just meet every expectation, then maybe I could earn the kind of love that didn't hurt, didn't demand, didn't take things from me that I wasn't ready to give. But perfection is exhausting, and performance takes a toll on your soul. I started having nightmares. Not about Papa, never about Papa, because I'd trained myself not to think about those years. Instead, I dreamed about being chased by faceless men, through houses that had too many doors, all of them locked from the outside. I started having panic attacks during the day, usually triggered by things I couldn't identify or explain. The smell of aftershave, the sound of footsteps on stairs, the way shadows fell across doorways in the late afternoon. Robert had no patience for what he called my nervous spells. "You're too sensitive," he'd say when he found me crying for reasons I couldn't articulate. "You need to toughen up. Life is hard enough without borrowing trouble." Borrowing trouble. As if my trauma was something I'd chosen to pick up and carry around, rather than something that had been forced on me when I was too young to refuse it. When I got pregnant with our first child, I thought motherhood would finally heal whatever was broken inside me. I thought having a baby would teach me what real love looked like, would show me the difference between caring for someone and using them. Sarah was born on a Tuesday in May, perfect and beautiful and completely dependent on me for everything. The moment I held her, I understood love in a way I never had before. Fierce and protective and completely selfless. I also understood terror in a new way, because now I had someone to protect, and I knew exactly what children needed protection from. I became a different kind of mother than I'd planned to be. Hyper-vigilant, overprotective, unable to leave Sarah with babysitters or even relatives for more than an hour or two. I watched every adult who interacted with her like a hawk, looking for signs of inappropriate interest or boundary violations. Robert thought I was being ridiculous. "You can't protect her from everything," he'd say when I refused to let Sarah spend the night at her grandmother's house or when I insisted on staying at birthday parties instead of dropping her off. You're going to turn her into a nervous wreck like you. A nervous wreck like me. The phrase stung because it carried truth I couldn't deny. I was a nervous wreck even if I didn't understand why. I was damaged in ways I couldn't explain, broken by experiences I couldn't remember clearly enough to heal from. But I knew I'd rather be an overprotective mother than the alternative. I'd rather err on the side of caution than fail to keep my daughter safe. When Sarah was 3 and started asking innocent questions about bodies and differences between boys and girls, I found myself paralyzed. I had no framework for healthy conversations about sexuality or physical boundaries. My only reference points were shame and secrecy and confusion. How do you teach a child about appropriate touch when your own understanding of touch was corrupted before you had language to describe it? How do you explain body autonomy when you've never experienced it yourself? How do you create safety when you're not even sure what safety looks like? I bought books, dozens of them, child development guides and parenting manuals and age-appropriate books about bodies and safety. I read everything I could find about how to protect children from predators, looking for wisdom that would help me succeed where my own mother had failed. But all the books in the world couldn't fill the holes that Papa's tradition had left in my understanding of love and trust and safety. When Sarah turned 6, the same age I'd been when Papa first came to my room, I had what Robert called a complete breakdown. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't stop checking and rechecking the locks on all our doors and windows. I found myself standing in Sarah's doorway at night, watching her sleep, making sure she was safe, making sure no one was touching her inappropriately. "You need help," Robert said, and for once, I agreed with him. But I couldn't tell the therapist what was really wrong. I couldn't explain that I was terrified my daughter would experience what I'd experienced, that I was haunted by memories I'd been taught to call love, that I carried shame and guilt and confusion about things that had happened to me decades earlier. Instead, I talked about anxiety and perfectionism and the pressures of motherhood. I learned coping strategies and relaxation techniques and got a prescription that helped with the panic attacks. The therapist helped, in her way, but she was treating symptoms, not causes, because I couldn't give her the information she would have needed to understand what was really haunting me. The silence that had protected Papa's secret for so many years now protected it from my own healing. That's the cruelest part of childhood sexual abuse. It doesn't just steal your innocence in the moment. It steals your ability to seek help later, to name what happened, to heal from what was done to you. Because the person who hurt you convinced you it was love. Because they taught you it was normal. Because they made you complicit in your own victimization by calling it tradition and making you believe you were special for participating. And because you learned that some secrets are too dangerous to tell, even to people who are trying to help you. So you carry it alone. You parent from a place of terror you can't explain. You love your children with a desperation that exhausts you, and you protect them from dangers you can't name. And you tell yourself that's enough. That keeping them safe is more important than healing yourself. That your damage is an acceptable price to pay for their innocence. You tell yourself a lot of things when you're trying to survive with secrets that were never yours to keep. Most of them are lies, but it takes decades to learn the difference. I'm 85 years old now, sitting in the same house where Robert and I raised our children, where I spent 60 years trying to be normal. Robert's been gone for 8 years, taken by a heart attack that gave him no time for deathbed confessions or final conversations about the things we never discussed. Sarah has children of her own now. Grandchildren I adore, but watch with the same vigilance I once brought to protecting her. My son Michael lives across the country, calls every Sunday, and has no idea why his mother always sounds relieved when he tells her his children are safe and happy. Neither of my children knows the truth about their grandfather. Neither of them understands why I could never leave them alone with Papa, why I insisted on being present for every visit, every babysitting offer, every attempt at creating special grandfather-grandchild traditions. They thought I was being overprotective. They had no idea I was being vigilant. Papa died 15 years ago, taking his reputation as a devoted father and pillar of the community to his grave. People spoke at his funeral about his kindness, his generosity, his love for his family. I sat in the front pew and felt nothing but relief that his secrets were finally buried with him. Except they weren't buried, not really, because I was still alive, still carrying the weight of what he'd taught me to call tradition, still carrying shame that belonged to him, not to me, still protecting the memory of a man who'd never protected me. Last month, Sarah mentioned that she's been having trouble with her own daughter, my 7-year-old granddaughter Emma, named after my mother. Emma's been having nightmares, has become clingy and anxious, has started asking strange questions about whether some secrets are okay to keep. I don't know what's wrong with her, Sarah said during one of our weekly phone calls. She's acting like something scared her, but she won't tell me what. It's probably nothing. You know how imaginative kids can be. Something in her voice, the worry, the helplessness, the desire to protect her child from something she couldn't identify, broke something open inside me. I realized that my silence wasn't protecting anyone anymore. It was just perpetuating the same cycle of secrets and shame that had defined my entire life. What if Emma was experiencing something similar to what I'd experienced? What if some other relative or family friend had convinced her that inappropriate touching was normal, was love, was tradition? What if my determination to take Papa's secret to my grave meant that another little girl would suffer in silence because her family didn't have the tools to recognize the signs of abuse? That night, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I called Sarah and asked her to come over. I told her I had something important to share, something I should have told her decades ago. When she arrived the next morning, I could see the worry in her face. She probably thought I was going to tell her about a terminal diagnosis or a financial crisis or some other disaster that aging brings. She had no idea I was about to give her the tools to protect her daughter in ways my mother had never been able to protect me. Sarah, I said, settling into the chair where I'd spent 60 years keeping Papa's secret. I need to tell you something about your grandfather, something I should have told you when you were young, something that might help you understand why I've always been so careful about the children. I told her everything. Every detail I could remember about that summer when I was 6. About the tradition Papa invented to justify his abuse, about the years of silence and shame and confusion that followed. I told her about the way predators groom their victims, how they convince children that abuse is love, how they create complicity by making their victims feel special and chosen and responsible for protecting the secret. I told her about the signs to watch for, not just with strangers, but with family members, family friends, people in positions of trust and authority. Most importantly, I told her that children don't lie about these things, that when a child acts afraid or uncomfortable or asks strange questions about secrets, it's almost always because something has happened that they don't have words to describe. Sarah cried when I finished. She cried for the little girl I'd been, for the mother I'd tried to be despite my damage, for the grandmother who'd carried this burden alone for so many decades. But she also listened, really listened, and she asked the right questions. Is that why you never left us alone with Grandpa? Is that why you were always so worried about sleepovers and camps? And babysitters? Yes, I said. And the relief of finally speaking the truth was overwhelming. I was trying to protect you from what happened to me, even though I couldn't tell you what I was protecting you from. And Emma, you think someone might be… I don't know, I said honestly. But I think you should ask her, gently, carefully, but directly. Ask her if anyone has ever touched her in ways that made her uncomfortable. Ask her if anyone has ever told her to keep secrets about touching or special games or traditions. Use those words specifically. Use those words specifically. Because predators often use the same language I heard from Papa: special, tradition, love, secret. If someone has convinced Emma that inappropriate touching is normal or traditional, she might not understand that it's something she should report. Sarah went home that day with a better understanding of how to protect her daughter and why protection was necessary. She had conversations with Emma that I was never able to have with my own mother. And Emma, thank God, was fine. Her nightmares and anxiety were the result of a scary movie she'd seen at a friend's house, not abuse. Her questions about secrets were normal childhood curiosity, not signs of trauma. But Sarah now knows what to watch for. She knows how predators operate, how they convince children to participate in their own victimization, how they use authority and trust and family loyalty to silence their victims. She knows because I finally broke the silence that had protected Papa's secret for 79 years. I'm 85 years old. Papa has been dead for 15 years. Nothing I say now can bring him to justice or undo what he did to me. But my truth can protect other children. My truth can give other mothers the tools they need to recognize abuse and respond appropriately. My truth can break the cycle of silence that allows predators to operate within families, trusted and protected by the very people whose children they're victimizing. That's why I'm telling this story now. Not for revenge. What would be the point? Not for justice. That ship sailed decades ago when I chose protection over prosecution. I'm telling this story because silence protects the wrong people. I'm telling this story because tradition should never be used to justify trauma. I'm telling this story because at 85 years old, I finally understand that speaking truth isn't about destroying the dead. It's about protecting the living. My name is Dorothy. I survived. And I'm done protecting the memory of a man who never protected me. The tradition ends here.